Vice President JD Vance in Minnesota yesterday calling for local and state lawmakers to help turn down the temperature when it comes to the tensions surrounding ICE enforcement operations. Joining us for Insight is Simon Hankinson, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Simon. Will this press conference shift the dial? The Vice President making his way all the way there, making some big, bold statements. What do you think?
Well, I think unfortunately in this era of political theater, it probably won't change many minds. I am on the side of law enforcement trying to do its job. I believe that opening the borders for 4 years was national suicide. I believe that if you impede federal law enforcement from doing its job, you're essentially saying that the rule of law does not apply in your city or your state. You're nullifying the Constitution and federal law. Vance is extremely eloquent. He doesn't have to convince me, but I'm afraid the ideologues in places like Minneapolis are just so dead set on the idea that not only should law enforcement not be allowed to deport people who are here illegally, but it should not be allowed to deport people who are here illegally and have long and often violent criminal records, which is a
Yeah.
position that is kind of hardened over time.
Yeah, the vice president yesterday also, he kind of pointed to what he thinks of as the far left driving these protests and this unrest in Minnesota regarding ICE. At the same time, a recent Ipsos Reuters poll came out showing that approval for ICE operations and immigration enforcement at the moment is at about 40%, which is lower than previously. It's been an issue that the president has really pulled well on. What do you think is needed for example, to turn down the temperature as the VP is calling for?
No, you're right. I mean, in the media war, the left controls more than the right. I mean, 80, 90% of the national media are left of center. And so, every arrest is a BIPOC grandmother or, a transgender puppy or an innocent child. It's never a dangerous gang member or a criminal. So in the context of like the latest one was the 5-year-old kid who supposedly was arrested. That was the headline. I don't believe any headlines until I've waited about 24 hours, and then you find out what actually happened, which is that they were trying to arrest the father who had violated immigration law and was deportable, and the father ran away and abandoned the child. So of course they can't let this 5-year-old freeze to death in the street and had to take him to social services or family member or something. So what needs to happen? Well, I don't think the president can back down and simply acknowledge that cities and states have a right to override federal law, because where does that end? Can they override tax law? If I don't like speed limits because I like to drive fast, do I get to say no? You can't enforce speed limits in this part of my town. But on the other hand, I think they will probably want to shift tactics so that it's less obvious where they're going to be and when, to give the activists less notice, and maybe do some more workplace enforcement, and just switch it up a bit, because right now the activists seem to have the upper hand on some of these public relations exercises like that church invasion and the public street protests.
And the vice president also called for local and state officials to meet the federal government and ICE operations halfway. What would that look like to you?
Well, at the very least, local police are supposed to protect civilians in their cities. And I understand the argument that they don't have extra manpower to go and actively assist ICE, but that's not what they're being asked to do. All they're being asked to do is honor detainers. So when they arrest somebody and that person also has an immigration warrant, let Immigration and Customs Enforcement know so that they can then pick the person up when the other judicial process is over for their criminal case or civil case, and they can pick them up quietly in the police station, at the court, but out of sight, not in the street. And they don't have to go out and arrest them, because that's what takes so much time and energy and unfortunately muscle and guns, is that if you have to go into a neighborhood that is utterly hostile and you have to find somebody who doesn't want to be found, and in some cases is an armed criminal, you've got to bring a lot of resources. But when you do it inside a jail, it's easy. So that's why you don't see so many of these cases in states that are run by Republicans or conservatives, or even Democrats who believe in enforcing the rule of law, because they're just taking care of business quietly.
And we do have some allegations from the FBI and others within the federal government that there may be some kind of organized crime, organized protesting operations going on here. It may not be the kind of grassroots operation that it looks like. Just from your perspective, though, what can concerned citizens do to make their voices heard without turning the temperature up in ways that are dangerous for themselves and others?
Well, they're called elections, and they happen every couple of years. You elect members of Congress and local officials and the president to carry out your wishes. And yes, we have I think the March for Life is this week, where people are protesting against abortion. You have every single opinion there could be has the right to come to Washington, D.C. and march up and down with signs. Write editorials, try to convince people in your community and your neighborhood. But what they've done here is really cross the line. I mean, when you you can't go into someone's house uninvited and stay when they've asked you to leave and say, no, but I'm just here to express my First Amendment rights. No, that doesn't work that way. You can't break into a church or a private place of business and force them to listen to you. The First Amendment simply allows you to speak, but it does not say you can speak anywhere you want, anytime you want. So I think that's where these activists have really crossed the line. Even in the civil rights movement, when they had a cause that, in my mind, was much more justified and noble, there were certain rules they respected. They didn't bust into churches in the middle of worship and stop people from praying uninvited. They were much more respectful and trying to win people, the public, over by their higher level of conduct and dignity, and not try to take the lowest possible ground, which is what we're seeing now.
Glad to have these discussions with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Simon Hankinson.
Thank you.